Good morning, guys. If you're new here, hi, I'm Bree. I live in Kansas Zone 7A, and today I'm going to give you a tour of my backyard garden here in the month of August. The garden has done so well this year, and I'm so excited to show you guys the garden this month. I was looking back at old garden tours, and honestly, I don't know if I've ever had a garden look this good in August and also produce this well this year. This has been one of my best gardening years in the 7 years I've gardened, and I have hoped for a year like this for years. Very excited to kind of talk about how everything's gone over July and August, because there's been a lot, which we will just go ahead and start with cantaloupe here, because there was a cantaloupe ready this morning. So I grow a variety called Howes or Hales Jumbo, however you want to pronounce it. And I love this cantaloupe so much. This is actually one of the smaller ones I have gotten off of this plant so far. The one I got last week was probably my largest I've ever grown, and it was right around 9 pounds. It was like 8.14, I think 8 pounds, 14 ounces. So honestly, so crazy and such a good cantaloupe. So not only are these melons nice and big, they also are so juicy and so flavorful. This is a variety I have now grown for 3 years. I've saved my own seeds. They have done so well, and they are just an absolute favorite here. I originally chose this variety because I grew a cantaloupe in the past called a Charente melon, which is more of an individual size melon, which is great and all, but when I have a smaller backyard garden and I'm looking for production, a nice big cantaloupe is where it's at. And honestly, this plant here has already given me, what, 6 or 7 of these big cantaloupes, and I still have probably at least 6 that are going to be coming off of this plant within the next week, and I have more setting fruit. So like I said, the first few that come off of this plant are so big, and then they tend to get smaller throughout the growing season, but still a really good sized cantaloupe. And before we move on, I have to obviously talk about the Goldie Honey Bears. So these are Goldie Honey Bear sunflowers. These are my tried and true favorite sunflowers. I love them because they typically have a longer bloom period than your traditional sunflower. I have a sunflower over there in the corner you might be able to see. A traditional sunflower has one head. Once it blooms, it starts to die back, and they are very quick. That was one thing I didn't know about growing sunflowers, is how fast that turnaround time is with them. And I found these Goldie Honey Bears, and one, I love them because they're this beautiful fluffy sunflower, but they also have a bloom period of about 4 to 6 weeks depending. I had one go a little bit longer last year, but they bloom multiple times. They are so pretty, and I love them. But I'm just really proud of how the entrance of the garden looks this year. I have wanted a symmetrical, big statement entrance to the garden for years, and this is the first time in 3 years I have finally got these sunflowers to bloom at the same time at the beginning. So I am just really happy with how this front space looks. In previous years, I also grew to like indeterminate tomatoes on my trellises, like on my individual trellises, and they just never looked as full. If you actually go back to 2023's August garden tour, this garden looks insanely different, and it's honestly crazy to me because the trellises this year are just putting on such a show. Also along the front here, I do have some echinacea that I planted on both corners. I do want more coneflower in this garden. This is a variety of zinnia called Queen Orangey Lime, and I love this because you get so many different color variations out of these blooms. This color is probably one of my favorites out of it, but you also get this really pretty peachy color as well. And then you get one that's almost a little lighter that I have back here. I love the lime series of zinnias, and I'm thinking I might try to find some more lime series because there's a few different ones and give those a try next year. One thing about these trellises is they are starting to die back just a little bit, which is pretty normal for this time of year. We actually had a very cool, I want to say cool July, because June was hot. In June, we had so many days in the 90s, and then July got here and we were having highs in the 80s, which I honestly don't really recall ever happening. So we ended up having a slight cool down, and I was really excited for it because I felt like this garden going into August would be thriving other than dying, because typically we get so hot in July. It's really hard to keep up on a lot of the plants just thriving. It's very difficult. But like I said, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 6 more cantaloupes right now that will be giving me some fruit within the next week or two. But I also have a handful of smaller ones that are just now producing. I also just love growing melons because they typically will put on multiple waves. I have found cantaloupe to be so easy. They naturally detach themselves from the vine, unlike a lot of other melons. I found other melons to be really tricky when you're growing them because you are looking for cues and signs when a cantaloupe will just naturally detach. And that is one reason why I have these melon cradles on all of my cantaloupes, because when they're ready, they will just let go, and that way they're not crashing to the ground and then breaking. I do have honeydew this year, which has been a little bit tricky. I have not picked one yet. I think I am very close. I might pick one this weekend. I'm looking for a few things like tendrils dying and then the middle part underneath to be a little bit soft. I don't want to go too long though. Last year I had a lot of difficulty with watermelon. I had one good watermelon, I think, out of the 5 or 6 I grew. Watermelon was tricky, so I didn't grow watermelon this year, but cantaloupe is a tried and true. And if you're looking for a melon, I highly suggest giving cantaloupe a try because honestly, the flavor is it's unmatched. Now, one of the areas in the garden that has changed dramatically in the last 4 weeks would be this area. If you jump back to July's garden tour, all of these plants were maybe a foot tall, maybe. And now we are starting to get silks producing on the corn. I have been doing a little bit of self-pollinating just to maybe help the fact. So corn this year, I wouldn't say is newer for me, but I have never been successful with corn. I've tried to grow corn 2 separate years and they have just been a fail. Corn has been a trickier crop. 1, they take a lot of nutrients, and 2, I didn't grow them right in the past. So corn needs a block to be able to pollinate correctly because they do wind pollinate. So these tops here, they have to fall down to the silks, and that is what pollinates your corn. So that's one of those things where I grew them in like maybe a row or 2 and they were never getting pollinated correctly. So I also, again, like I said, have been doing a little bit of hand pollination to maybe guarantee a little bit more success, but I've never been successful with corn. So I decided to take a gamble and a chance on corn this year because I have had just a very good successful year, and I am a personal believer that you do not grow as a gardener unless you try something new. So I really like to try a handful of new varieties every year, maybe try something I have failed at that I've never been good at. So this is going to be very interesting to see how the corn continues to go. It's been doing really well, and I've been seeing so many bees over here, and also ladybugs. The ladybugs have been really gravitating over here because I will say, out of all things this year, I have not had many pest problems outside of aphids. The aphids this year have been kind of crazy. I'm not gonna lie, I've not had issues really outside of that, but I will take aphids over squash bugs. I have only been able to find like 3 adult squash bugs. I have found a handful of eggs, but other than that, I have not had the issue with squash bugs like I had last year. Last year was insane with squash bugs. But I also have okra over here. This is just I want to say Clemson spineless okra. This is going to really start producing here soon. It's getting really close, and this might be the best okra I've ever grown as far as looks go. So I'm really hoping I end up getting enough out of this to where I can actually can up some pickled okra. And lastly, I have my zucchini here, which obviously the zucchini has been attached by squash bugs this year. This zucchini is the only squash variety I grew this year because I was not wanting to mess with it. I did put it under insect netting, but somehow the squash bugs still found their way under the insect netting. I will say I still believe it's helping out reduce the numbers greatly, so I will take that. But we've gotten a few zucchini. I didn't even get any zucchini, I think, the last 2 years. I didn't grow it 2 years ago, and then last year I had a volunteer plant that got attacked by vine borer. Honestly, squash varieties are so difficult to grow here that I've been trying to roll them out. You will see one reason why I didn't grow squash this year is because I decided to do sweet potatoes, and sweet potatoes like thrive in really hot, humid conditions, and they also don't get attacked by squash bugs. So I was like, maybe I can grow sweet potatoes instead of winter squash and get that very similar flavor profile, because you can kind of cross those in recipes. You can use sweet potato versus a winter squash and get a very similar effect as a pumpkin. So I was really hoping for that this year, and I'll show you guys that in a second. So if you didn't know, okra is actually related to hibiscus. So they put on very similar looking flowers. They're this really pretty yellow hibiscus hibiscus looking flower, and that's one thing I love about okra. But here is the zucchini. I have been self-pollinating this as well. So these are male flowers, the ones you see without any type of fruit on the bottom. And then these fruits, actually, you can see that one back there, how there's a fruit and then there's a flower attached to it. This flower hasn't opened up yet, but the moment that opens, which will probably be tomorrow morning, squash flowers really, really quickly. So you have to be on top of it. So I'm going to be planting out my fall garden. I've already done a little bit of planting as we are talking at the moment. I have some carrots and some broccoli planted. I'll be planting some more broccoli, but I plan to use these hoops to kind of extend my season into winter. This is something I've played around with on and off over the years, but sometimes I just fail at a fall garden. And last year, I think I just planted out my stuff a little too late. I started my broccoli at the end of June, so they are ready to be planted. And I have a few other things that I will be planting out, but I really want to try to overwinter more than I have in the past. That way I can also give the girls a treat, my chickens, give them different kale, collards, cabbage, broccoli, leaves, you name it. So I really want to try to be a little bit more successful with that. We'll see if that happens. But overall, everything else over here, I have a handful of pepper plants. So right here, and these two beds were where I had the garlic at the beginning of the year. And I had extra pepper plants that I originally planted at the end of January. I was able to plant out and they are producing really well. So what I did was up pot them in May. And then once the garlic was out, I planted out some more peppers. So going into next year, one thing I want to be a little bit better about is my succession sowing after my big harvest of garlic and onions. That's one thing I could be a little bit better about, especially with the onions, is once the onions come out at the beginning of July, I could get another round of tomatoes and get a whole second succession of tomatoes. So that's one thing I'm thinking I'm going to do a little bit differently next year. You will see in a second, I do have some gaps still in the garden from where the onions were harvested. I harvested the onions at the beginning of July. If you go back to last garden tour, you will see they were still in the ground. I left this space blank just for the last like 4 weeks. That's one of those things I was debating if I wanted to do a second succession of summer crops or if I wanted to do another succession of cool weather crops, and you just kind of have to prioritize when things are coming out. But that's one thing I am planning already for next year. I actually like to really take notes around this time of year because once winter comes, I'm so focused on spring and early summer, I kind of forget about this gap of just weirdness that goes in my garden because we do have a longer growing season here. I'm currently sitting right around 75 days before my first average frost. I still have a little bit of time, but we are now past that window where I could really get any more summer stuff going. If I want another succession of summer, I almost have to get it in during that first week of July. But I have some cosmos here, which I love cosmos, but guys, you have to keep up on cosmos so much. You have to deadhead these pretty much every other day if you want them to be in continuous bloom, which they have been some work, but I really like them. So this is honeydew, and one thing that I found really funny about this trellis is you can see it's very abundant now, but if you go back in July's garden tour, this side was not as full as this side was, and I have 2 plants on each side, but the one thing that was really different is I had to cut back on the watering of onions during those last few weeks of onions so they could cure a little bit easier. And speaking of curing, I'm kind of jumping all over the place. The onions have been curing in my garage for the last 4 weeks, roughly 4 weeks. They are going to be going into the basement sometime within the next week. They are really close. I just checked a few of them the other day and they needed a little bit longer, but this side was not as full because I had to cut back on the watering so much. I would prefer to cut back on the onions, and this side was just so full and abundant. It has definitely eased up a little bit, but this plant is so crazy, and you guys have to see the size of these honeydews. I have never seen a honeydew this big, but I guess I never saw a cantaloupe as big as I've grown them either until I grew them in my garden. But these honeydews are massive, and I am so excited. I've never grown honeydew. Honeydew is probably my favorite melon, and I don't know why I've never attempted it, but this is the year. I want to say I have 6 honeydews at the moment, And this one here is probably the one that is the closest that I will be picking maybe tomorrow or the next day. I feel like they're starting to smell just a smidge sweeter. I feel like we're really close. So one thing with honeydew that I have seen is you want to wait for the tendril to die back, which is this little part here that like grabs onto anything. When this turns yellow and dies back, when it's like the closest one to the melon, it's typically a good indicator that it's ready to be picked. Another thing you can do is at the bottom, there's a little part that you can push on, and if that is slightly soft, is another good indicator. And then they will also kind of change a color. So honeydew starts off pretty green, and then it slowly turns to more of like a pale yellow. So I'm very excited to see how this honeydew goes, because I've never grown it before. This is a brand new one to me. Oh no, this one's cracking. It's still fine, I can eat it, so I guess I'm gonna go ahead and pick my first honeydew. Hold on. If I leave this, it's just going to crack more. And if I go ahead and pick it now, I can go ahead and use it. So, wow. You guys can see that slight cracking that's going on. That's kind of what happens when a melon or a tomato is in its final stages of ripening and it gets too much water, which makes sense. We got rain out of nowhere last night, and I've been cutting back a little bit on watering these melons just because I know that they've been getting so close. Typically, if I have rain coming in and I have a bunch of tomatoes that are ripening, I will go ahead and pick them, because if I get an influx of rain like that, they're almost guaranteed to crack. And I've experienced the same thing with melons over the years. I will say this smells really, really good. And I bet if we didn't get that influx of rain yesterday, we would have been just fine. But here's to the first honeydew. We'll cut it at the end of the video and we'll see how it looks and give it a taste test. So, but look how huge that is. And this has to weigh at least 8 pounds, I would say. So we'll weigh it, we'll crack it open, and we'll try it at the end. Moving on, this is where the onions were, like I was just mentioning. So I will be planting some cool weather crops over here. A lot of my broccoli is going to go in the in-ground space. I have this open for different things like cabbage, lettuce, stuff like that. I will be planting those out within the next month. I do need to start some lettuce today because I keep forgetting I need to start lettuce, but lettuce is super quick. I'm not worried about it. Typically, if I get that in by the beginning of September, I'll be completely fine. A lot of those longer cool weather crops like broccoli and cabbage are the things I needed to get started earlier, which I did. But one thing you might be able to see is the tomatoes are very light in green color. So I've definitely been hit with blight, but honestly, it really doesn't matter. I have had one of the best tomato years I have ever had in my 7 years of gardening, and I've been wanting a tomato year like this for a very long time. This year, I think I'm gonna actually at least be able to get a year's worth of crushed tomatoes and salsa. We'll see. I'm pretty close already. These plants are starting to slow down quite a bit though, which is completely fine. I grow majority determinate plants, and we'll kind of talk about that in a minute, but I have not had good success with indeterminate tomatoes at all the last 3 years outside of cherry tomatoes. Every time I try to grow a San Marzano or an Amish paste, they don't do well. The plants do not thrive in this garden, and I've never had as big of an issues with indeterminate tomatoes as I have determinate. So a determinate plant is a bush tomato. They typically put on majority of their fruit and ripen around all at the same time. And that is one reason why I had about 150 pounds of tomatoes getting processed in my kitchen over the last few weeks. And I have more tomatoes. Half of my tomato table is almost full again. This is one of my little perennial patches that I have, and the yarrow has definitely pretty much all gone to seed at this point. I need to cut back and thin out the yarrow this year. I used to have multiple patches of coneflower throughout this as well, and the yarrow has just completely taken over the space. So this space needs a little bit of resetting. I also planted a bunch more of anise hyssop this year. So I've had hyssop in my garden pretty much since year one. I didn't have as much of it last year. A lot of it died back for the first time ever, but hyssop is one of those plants I don't really use outside of attracting bees. Bees love this plant. It smells like licorice. You can use it for tea and tinctures and things like that, but I use it for the bees because the bees love this stuff. I actually grew this from a mistake. My first year gardening, me and my husband just saw the word lavender on a seed packet and we grabbed it and we thought we were growing lavender, but no, it was lavender hyssop. And I did not realize that until years later because I planted this out. It came back every year and I never knew what I was growing. And then I finally found the seed packet once I got a little bit more into gardening, and I realized I was completely wrong on it for years. So that was a little mistake I made in my beginning years of gardening. Yeah, you can see the bees are buzzing around it and they absolutely love it. Then we have our jalapenos and one random tomato plant I planted because I had a jalapeno plant die, but these jalapenos have been doing so well. I've been able to get so much of these for salsa. One thing I'm thinking I might do with a lot of these jalapenos is to leave them and let them go red. So I really want to try to make my own sriracha, and sriracha is made from red jalapenos. So jalapenos start off green and then as they mature, they will actually get red. So I'm thinking I might play around with a lot more fermented hot sauces this year. One of the areas that has not thrived for me this year is this back area, which is where I used to have my compost. I did plant out a second round of cucumber. I do have some peas in here, and then I had a backup tomato I threw over here. But one thing that's so interesting is you can see how terrible this tomato looks. It really was hit with blight, but we have all this new growth coming on and flowers, and it's still putting on some new fruit. So I'm just gonna leave it for now. Now, I don't even know if me putting you on like a widescreen is really going to show you guys just how massive this sunflower is currently. This is a volunteer for me. I did not plant this sunflower. This is how tall I'm 5'6". This plant is at least 12 to 13 feet tall. So I think this volunteer sunflower is thriving because, again, I had my compost pile here, and one thing I did at the beginning of the year was I leveled out this area with some of the extra compost I had, and I think this is just sucking up so much of the nutrients that I threw right here. And it's thriving. It hasn't even started to bloom yet, which I honestly think is crazy. This thing is gonna have so much blooms on it. I do have some other sunflowers that I planted along the fence line already blooming, but none of my volunteers this year have started to bloom. I have 5 of these volunteers all around the garden, and this one is just insanely large. The largest sunflower I ever grew was over 14 feet tall. It was so big, and I have not got one bigger than that ever. I've always tried. That one was a Russian mammoth. I actually need to get my hands on some more Russian mammoth seeds, but here is the loofah trellis, and we are starting to get some loofah. I have one right here that is dry that I will probably be getting in the next few days. The skin is still a little soft, so I'm gonna let it go a little longer, but I am having some color change go on with some of our first loofahs of the year. So this trellis here is a 20-foot long trellis. I have 5 cattle panels on this trellis. Cattle panels are a pretty affordable way if you ever want to do any type of trellising. I do know in Canada they are pretty expensive, and they've also gone up in price here in the States. I bought these originally for I think $19, and they're up to like $30, $35 depending on where you live, at least from what I've seen. Still, again, a pretty affordable option for a trellis. I just use some T-posts here, and I do get the remark a lot that some people live in super windy areas. Guys, I live in Kansas where we get wind gusts sometimes of 50, 60 miles per hour, sometimes even bigger than that, and I've never had an issue. These things are really strong, and I mean, they have some weight on them, so keep that in mind. They're a pretty good trellis. With the loofah, I always get the remark that I should try to eat them. So when they are smaller, like some of the ones I just showed you, they are tender and you're able to eat them. I've been waiting though, because typically as of right now, any of the loofahs that are set on this plant will probably dry out for me and actually create a sponge, and that's my overall goal. Anything that is going to be starting to get put on this plant probably in the next like 4 weeks, I can guarantee won't dry out on the plant. And harvesting loofah when they're green for sponges is possible, but it's more difficult. So I figured that once I get into like the next 4 weeks, I will try to cook up some loofah and taste it for the first time. People say they love it. So if you have, if you've actually grown it yourself, please let me know how you prepare it, because I think that's going to be something that I'll be doing in the next month or so, because I'm very intrigued. Outside of loofah, oh my gosh, that is a big spider. This is starting to become the time of year where I start having spiders, which they're pretty much harmless, these types of spiders, but I always have to watch out in this trellis area because I will get a good amount of spider webs that just appear out of nowhere. But what I was saying is I also have green beans on this trellis. And one thing I'm experiencing at the moment is very, very small bean pods that aren't growing past pretty much this. So I, in the past, have grown a lot more bush beans, and bush beans will definitely, the plant will stunt out when it gets really hot. And the bean pods will actually do the same thing when it's really hot. So these plants really have not been producing much. Since we ended up having 2 separate heat waves, it's really kind of cut back on the production of green beans I've been able to get. When we had that cooler stretch in July, these plants put on so many flowers, but I'm not getting beans that are bigger than this at the moment. But yeah, this is kind of disappointing. This is one of the areas of the garden that has just not done as good as I have hoped. I had an amazing first wave in June of green beans, but as far as July goes, I don't think I harvested any green beans in July. They were all really tiny like this, and I kept waiting for them to get bigger, but that is when I learned that bean pods can also be stunted just like the plants when it gets super, super hot. So if you're having similar issues with green beans, I typically always have issues with green beans around this time of year. We'll see. I don't know if this will be my green bean redemption year or not, like I originally thought, but I still got more green beans this year than I have in previous years. So on this opposite side of the loofah trellis, the loofah is way more advanced this year than it has ever been. I have never had it already like completely winding down at the beginning of August, and it's putting on so many new fruits. But over here on this side, I actually have a few cucumber plants. This was one of those years I did not want to grow a bunch of cucumbers. I did not want to do any canning of pickles. Cucumbers produce so much and you have to be on top of your pickling, and I just did not want to deal with that this year. So I took a year off of that. Outside of that, I did have my indeterminate plants over here for tomatoes. I had some San Marzanos and also cherries, and I ripped them out, I want to say end of June, beginning of July, and I planted out some more green beans and also another melon. So I don't know what this melon is. My aunt went to Greece and she sent me some melon seeds, and I am so excited about this. The seed packet that she gave me, I translated the Greek and it just said watermelon and melon seeds. So I don't know if this is going to be a watermelon. I don't know if it's a cantaloupe, a honeydew. I don't know if it's another type of melon I've never had before. So this is kind of my mystery melon, and it's starting to put on its first fruits. I do have some tomatoes over here. I should probably grab, considering I told you guys we got that rain. I don't want any of these to crack. So over here, I just have classic Roma tomatoes. So I love a good classic Roma. They tend to be a little less determinate than some of my other plants. I noticed that my classic Romas, like the one over there, will typically continue to put on fruit and flowers, unlike another variety I grow called the Suprema, which I'll show you guys in a second. I will say, out of all of my determinate plants I grow, I will say my traditional Roma is a little less consistent in fruit size, but they still produce insane amounts. I grow paste varieties outside of a cherry tomato. I don't like an heirloom beefsteak tomato at all. I'm also just not a big tomato girl. I grow all paste varieties because I like to make tomato products like crushed tomatoes, salsa, and different tomato sauce. So a paste variety is more meaty and less watery. One thing I hate about tomatoes, especially like beefsteak varieties, is just the wateriness. Like, I don't feel like you get any flavor out of the tomato at all because they're just so watery. So even if I were to eat a fresh tomato, I prefer a paste tomato because they're more meaty and I feel like they have more flavor. Since I'm harvesting some tomatoes, I'm gonna go ahead over here and grab some of the ones that look ready. So you might be able to tell with these plants, they are looking quite yellow. Most of my tomatoes at this point have been attacked by blight. One thing I've noticed over the years of growing tomatoes is, for me, my tomatoes typically get blight no matter what, end of July, beginning of August. And at that point, a lot of these tomatoes have already been put on and the plants are getting toward the end anyway. So the fact that they're dying back, I really don't care. And also with determinate plants, I have found I have a lot less issues with hornworms than I do indeterminates. Since indeterminates will continue to grow, for me, I typically will have issues with hornworms in August, September. So I'm approaching hornworm season around here. And for the most part, my tomato season is going to be up by the time a lot of the hornworms become a problem. So the other varieties I grow outside of a classic Roma are Supremo. And then this year I tried a new one called Inca Jewels. So the Supremo is a variety I've grown the last 2 years. And I will say these plants are the ones that get knocked with blight first, but they give me such big, beautiful, consistent Roma tomatoes. I think these are going to be a variety that I grow for years to come. They produce so much, and I will say the Supremos are definitely a true determinant. These plants really don't grow past this height at all, and they pretty much put on all their fruit all at one time. A regular Roma, I have not experienced as much of a true determinant with, but these produce such beautiful fruits. And the one thing I liked this year was the Inca Jewels. These ones also gave me such big, beautiful Roma tomatoes, and the production on them were so good. So I got these seeds from Renee's garden. I picked these because they were supposed to be a better container, high producing variety of Roma, and they have definitely shown that. And then the Supremos I have always gotten from Botanical Interest. If you haven't grown fall carrots, I highly suggest doing fall carrots. I actually prefer fall carrots over spring carrots, but I grow spring carrots so I can put some away easily for different things like soups and stews. And these ones I will actually leave out here all winter. So the one thing that's amazing about a fall carrot is the ground almost acts as your refrigerator, and the carrot, when it gets cold, it will store all of its sugar in the root system. So it ends up being a sweeter tasting carrot. So I will harvest these as I go throughout the winter months, and they will just stay out here, and I can grab some of these to eat fresh, or I can roast them up really easily. So if you don't have carrots on your list for fall, definitely do it. They are some of the best. The snapdragons are still putting on a show. So one thing I read about snapdragons, this is a first year for me with snapdragons, is they will do really well in the spring. They'll kind of slow down in the summer during the heat, and then they'll pick back up once it cools down. So since we had that like cool stretch in July, these have been really putting on a show over the last handful of days. I do need to go ahead and deadhead some more back, but I'm really loving snapdragons. I think they just add a nice touch of texture and color to the garden. I am drawing a blank on this cayenne variety. I believe it's called Red Ember. I have loved this. So last year I grew a new variety of cayenne and I did not like it whatsoever. The skin on it was so thin, it was so hard to work with. So this year I wanted to try to find a thicker walled cayenne. That is one of those things that I've experienced in the past where it's not necessarily a problem if I do any type of red pepper flakes because you're leaving the seeds in there anyway. But if you want a true cayenne powder, you do need to de-seed the cayenne. And a lot of cayenne varieties, I have found that their skin is so thin, it's really hard to work with them and to scrape out the seeds without just ripping the skin constantly. So this one here is thick walled, pretty much like my paprika variety that I grow. Honestly, I have to mark what baskets I put the cayennes in and the paprikas because they look so close and they feel so close in texture this year. It's really hard to tell. But I have loved this variety. They are so easy to work with and de-seed. I actually need to harvest a bunch of these this weekend and probably put them through the freeze dryer. But if you're having a similar issue, or if you're wanting to jump into making your own like red pepper flakes or cayenne powders, I highly suggest this variety. This is probably one of my favorites I've ever grown. But I also have some serranos here which have done well, and I will say I am not too happy with what I did with banana peppers this year. I honestly probably should have grown more than I did. I have 3 of these banana pepper plants, and in the past I've always done pickled banana peppers, and this year I just have a very awkward amount of banana peppers where I really can't even can them. I didn't can last year because I had an abundance in 2022 of pickled banana peppers. I have done some mixed like peppers, like pickled peppers, but as far as just like plain bananas, I have not been able to do too much outside of these other than doing like a mixed pickled pepper. The one variety I am not happy with at all this year is the poblano. I don't know what is going on, but I have never seen poblanos so small, and I'm not having a single issue with any other of my pepper plants. So I don't know if maybe this is just a variety I got that produces a smaller poblano, but I was really excited about this year, and overall, I'm just not impressed with this at all. I am having a really good bell pepper year though. So these ones are getting really close, and I'll probably be harvesting these probably within a few days. I'm waiting for them to just get a little bit more red, but I have had some really crappy bell pepper years the last few years, and this year has been completely different with that. I also am growing another new variety this year called just a snacking pepper, which it's this variety of different orange, yellow, and reds. These are typically the peppers you see in a bag at the store, and they're just good for dipping and stuff. And I've really liked these. I got these seeds from Johnny's, and really good, and they've been producing a good amount as well. And then we have my paprika variety. This is the Hungarian Magyar, and one thing about this little area is I had one of my plants completely get topped because my bird bath fell over it because a squirrel decided it was not happy that day. But I do need to go through and pick a bunch of these as well and get more of my paprikas dried up. But one of the things I think is so cool about this area, even though it looks pretty much like nothing, is you guys might recall I had broccoli planted in these 2 strips in the spring. And one thing I did was I cut it at the base, kind of like I do with lettuce. And when you do that with lettuce, they will regrow ahead of lettuce. So I was like, okay, well, will the same thing happen with broccoli? And to my surprise, it has. I've been so excited. I honestly probably should look at these plants because they're a little holy. So I almost wonder if cabbage moths are currently getting to them. But I did not plant out, technically, any of these broccoli plants. I had a bunch right over here that I separated out, and I have 9 that I did not plant. So we will see how these plants do. I'm pretty excited about it. Sometimes I really love experimenting because this is one of those things where this in-ground space gets pretty shaded out around this time of year, and it's been really tricky for me to find certain things that thrive in the middle of the summer. So if I can plant broccoli here in the spring, cut it at the base, and get stuff to grow back in the fall, and I don't have to do anything on my part, that would be really cool. I do have 24 more broccolis I will be planting out in this space, but if I get 9 more, I wasn't expecting, I'd be pretty happy about it. Over here, I do have my sweet potatoes, which I am very hyped about. I am growing all of these from like $2 I spent at the grocery store. I created my own slips. I have grown sweet potatoes one other time, but I was given the slips. This year's the first time I've ever grown sweet potatoes solely from my own. So I'm gonna be really curious to see how these will do. I don't know the varieties just since I bought them from the store. They are organic to potatoes though that I grew the slips from, and I do have a few Japanese sweet potatoes and then regular sweet potatoes, and you can see the differences in what the leaves look like. I'm really excited to see what type of harvest we get out of these. I won't know really until almost around our first average frost, either before or after, how these do, so they still have quite a bit of time. But here's what the leaf shape looks like differently. This is a Japanese sweet potato, and then here is your traditional sweet potato. Also over here, I have some hibiscus. This is a variety called Zinger hibiscus. You can use this for tea. The plants have been doing really well. I also have one in the front over there, but they have not been putting on a bunch of flowers. This is a tropical plant, so I feel like it's going to take some time. I did have some early blooms be set just because I started these so early in my basement. So we'll see if I get much out of these. Like I said, I got a few of the little, I think they're called a calyx or something. That's what you use for the tea portion, but this is a variety that you drink for tea purposes. We drink a lot of hibiscus tea here. And there's another volunteer sunflower. This one's kind of weird and wonky, and it's been growing at an angle this whole time, but it's still doing just fine. And there's a few others, like they're all huge and tall. They're all big. I have just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they're all kind of in this circle, which is really cool. Over here, lastly, I do have some dahlias. What is that? I don't know if I've ever seen that bug before. If you know what type of bug that is, let me know. That's an interesting one. But this is my dahlia area. I've never grown dahlias before, and I will say I'm hit or miss with these. I really, really love these like big, fluffier looking dahlias, like your classic looking dahlias. And I'm thinking if I grow dahlias next year, I want them to be more like this. This is from a seed packet from Floret, and from what I've seen with growing dahlias from seed outside of tubers, you don't get as like fluffy or like multiple petaled blooms as often. This is the only one I have over here that looks like this, and I prefer this look. I really like how tall they are, and they've been really pretty, so I don't hate them, but I do think I could do a lot better with the dahlias than I did this year. Now, this is my last section of the garden. I have a bunch of different zinnias over here, and the zinnias have been doing really well over here. This is an area I have found to be very difficult to find something that grows, because this is, again, another area that gets really shaded out during midsummer. I do have my one elderberry plant over here that seems to do really well, and I also have some iris, but this area has been tricky for me. This is an area I've had the chickens over the years. I'll move their fence a few times, but spring this area does well. It gets a lot of good sun until the tree shades out, but I've been trying to find more things I can grow over in this space because it is a good space to grow. It's just been harder to figure out, but I think that sums up the garden. So let's take this honeydew inside, oh my gosh, and see how much it weighs and see if it was ripe or not. I'm pretty sure it's probably ripe considering it cracked on me. All right, let's see how much this thing weighs. Okay. Oh my gosh. This melon weighs 10 pounds, 8 ounces. So 10.5 pounds. Oh my gosh. That might be the biggest melon I've ever grown. It's looking good. By the feel of it, I'm thinking this probably did need a little bit longer on the vine as far as color goes too. But this will still be a good indicator on how far along we really are with this. Okay, let's test it out. Oh, wow. It's definitely sweeter. Oh my gosh. Honestly, my mind is a little bit blown right now. This is why they call it honeydew. I feel like the very middle could have maybe gone like another few days. But this is still the sweetest honeydew I've ever tasted. I think we're really close on all those other ones being ready. That is game changer for sure. What a great surprise this morning. I'm telling you, eating seasonally will completely change your mind on how food should taste. I am mind blown right now. I have never had a honeydew taste like straight honey before. I am so excited about the rest of the honeydew I have on that plant now. But thank you guys so much for being here for the August 2024 garden tour. If you want to see any more of my previous garden tours from this year or previous years, I'll make sure to link a playlist for you guys. But as always, thank you guys so much for being here today and watching. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye.